Grow your practice, grow your wealth, grow your impact. Find out how to spend less time in the dental chair and more time on the things you love.
Welcome back to the Dental Wealth Podcast. Glad to have you back for number 98. 98. So we're almost to the 100 point. We're almost there. Thank you, all of you that are listening, that are with us today. Man, it feels good, Matthew.
Yep. I mean, we're on the home stretch here. I know we've getting a lot of build up to this point, and this is a Wednesday podcast. We normally do the Tuesday, Thursday.
I think first Wednesday podcast. Yep.
So we're hoping you're enjoying it. We're seeing great feedback so far with the likes and subscribes. You know, we're excited. We're on the home stretch here.
Here we are. Feeling good. Glad to have you back with us. Matthew, I think he's got like 5 things he wants to talk about. I just told him to pick one. I was going to say something I don't even remember now.
I try not to start with the long-winded question like I always do.
I'll start getting into like a big, long thought process. But look, 2020, you know, it's November 2020 for those of you who are listening, you know, in real time. And look, I tell people all the time, I mean, look, those of you that say like 2020 is a crappy year, I don't know what you think a rock going around another rock is going to change that. Yep. It's a complete mindset. People are going to sleep right now. Do not go to sleep. Listen to the podcast. Lean in right now. Like, get going. Like, don't fall back on your hunches. Like, don't give up. This is a great time.
This is how you make January good.
Man, I'm telling you right now, right? That's how you make January good. Like, everyone's asleep. Everyone's going to sleep. Turkey time. Hey, 2020 is a bust, you know? Oh, man, you know? And so, look, no flipping way. Like, now's the time. Like, so lean into this podcast. Glad to have you here. Matthew, what do we got on the agenda today?
So I got a question. You know, it's been a while since I've actually got this question. But we touched on it. I've heard you talk to, you know, every presentation basically. You know, at some gesture, you always get the question. Well, my practice is in New York City, and you just don't understand what New York City is. So to give you the backstory on how I came up with this question, I had a young lady call me looking at starting a dental practice, and she's gonna be starting in the New York area. And
what part, like Manhattan or like upstate or what?
She's still trying to figure that out.
Okay.
But her question after everything was, you know, do you have any clients in the New York area? How are you going to know, like, the market? Like, what can you expect? And, you know, and I told her, and I was like, Eric can touch better on this. I thought this would be a great opportunity to talk about it. But we approached it as a business. You know, business is, there's some key moves you need to make in different states. But if you approach it as a business, you're going to get business results. So I wanted to bring that up to you and get your opinion on it so the rest of the audience can figure out, you know, their practice isn't any different than the New York practice.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's funny. Last podcast we were talking about expense versus investment thoughts. Mm-hmm. Like, this is a perfect expense versus investment thought. The expense thought is like, my area is different. How do I be, you know, how can someone know my area? It's so unique. It's so different. And the investment is really like I'm going to utilize the area I've got to be extremely successful. Here's the thing I want people to know. First of all, we have clients from Florida to Washington, you know, Pennsylvania to, you know, Chicago. A lot of other, you know, all over the place, right? So, look, I mean, I've worked with clients in New Zealand. I've worked with clients in Canada. I've worked with clients in the United States. I've been in farm country to, like, I didn't even know corn country like looked like this. Like, I had no clue as a boy from Florida. I've been in the Midwest as Midwest can be. I've been in the frozen tundra. I've been in downtown Manhattan. It doesn't matter where it is, and that's the interesting part. So here's what business is business, right? Starbucks doesn't have to go, oh man, Manhattan is just tough, man. How are you supposed to be successful in Manhattan? Marketing principles are the same. Business principles are the same. And it's interesting. Some of the most successful practices that I've ever worked with are in very rural areas. Now, here's the thing about it. So let me give you an example where, like, somebody might get in their own mindset, expense thinking versus investment thinking. So when we think about this for a moment, like this idea of, like, let's go associate route. I'd love to do that one for a second. So when we think about associates, when we're in rural areas, what's the first thing we tell ourselves if we're in a rural area about associates?
It's going to be hard to find them.
Hard to find them, right? Who in the world would want to go out in the middle of the cornfields to go work? So it's going to be impossible to find somebody. Expense thinking, right? And so there's no yield from that, right? There's no yield from that. That's kind of like down in the dumps and no one's going to want to come here. Well, so here's what I hear from people in the city. It's so competitive. You can't hire an associate here because it's so competitive, right? Expense thinking, right? So it's like the person in the city is saying you can't hire an associate because of the fact that it's so competitive for associates. The person in the rural farm country says you can't find associates because nobody wants to work here. And the truth is that hiring individuals takes time, talent, and investment. The truth is, like, it's not like you have to attract talent, and this mindset of it's. By the way, saying, well, nobody wants to come out in the middle of farm country. It's not true. I've helped place associates in the middle of the darn nowhere. I've seen, and I'd argue, like, the fact is those people actually are from the area. They want to stay long term. They want to grow a family there. See, the people that want to actually go in rural areas are people that actually want to live there and raise their families there. They love the rural area. And you're not going to attract city folk to those areas. So here's what ends up happening is that it's just not true, because what ends up happening is just, there are more associates in metropolitan areas, but there are also a lot more competition. And so what ends up happening is you're in the same race. It's just the same race. And so you find yourself you might have to change some things, but ultimately speaking, business is business. Finding talent is the same. Going after patients and new patients is the same. And so what happens is people, here's what ends up happening is people start to have this mindset and belief. By the way, the one that told me, I have to tell you, the New Zealand person, told me the reason he couldn't get new patients is because China was inflating the price of wool or something, and then that was causing people to leave. And I mean, look, I've heard it all, okay? Like there's nothing you're going to bring me that I haven't heard. I've heard it all. But it wasn't true, because we, in fact, grew his new patients tremendously. I mean, it wasn't true at all. But it was a story that he could sit with, right? It was a story that he could sit with and tell himself. So when people find their area, what they'll do is, expense thinking, they'll look for the things that make their area difficult.
Yep.
Then they spend time creating neural pathways, believing that's true. It's not true. It's just something they've created. And then once they've created hell, they'll solidify the hell out of it. And then they go ask every person around them, don't you think it's hard to find people in rural areas? Mm-hmm. By the way, the question was a setup in itself.
Yep.
And then they say, well, yes. And then they say, well, see. And then their brain says, I knew it was hard to find people.
And I think this is especially true when it comes to dentists too, is, I mean, as we told, and you've heard us say this all the time, most dentists are fact finders. So they have to, before they can make a decision, they need a lot of information. So like when they're looking at this, and even the doctor that I was talking to on the phone, she was like, yeah, I'm putting all these lists together of all these things, and you're kind of putting yourself in a bubble by listing out every possible thing that could go right or wrong here. You're just kind of telling your story, and you're building this giant story that hasn't even come to fruition yet about what your practice is going to look like, and you're doing too much data digging instead of just doing.
Yeah. I mean, I ultimately, when somebody comes to me and they tell me it's their area, I know we've got some work to do. And it's not work on the practice. I mean, there is always work on the practice, but it's not the main problem. The main problem is a mindset. And the main problem is that mindset has created a reality. Someone told me one day, they were like, Eric, I thought you were going to find me an associate. I'm like, I'm not on a staffing company. I mean, ultimately you have to go get associates. You have to create the model for it. And I can show you how to do that. But ultimately you have to implement the model. You have to make it happen. And so when we look at things like that, we go, look at your area and look at the benefits of that area. See, what I would do is a little different. I would look at that area and say, what unique competitive advantages I have in this area. So for instance, if everyone's closed on Friday, I open Fridays. If everyone says it's impossible to find good people, it means they stopped looking, by the way. Yeah. I take advantage. I look at the marketplace and I say, what does this marketplace yield me differently than somewhere else? In fact, some rural areas get incentives from the government to practice there. They'll pay for your student loans. I mean, there's a lot of things that you could utilize, tools in your arsenal that you can bring out to attract those people. A lot of doctors are coming out of dental school with $300,000-$400,000 of loans, and there might be assistance programs that you can research and utilize that to recruit people. There's all kinds of things that you can utilize and look at and say, are there ways that I can bring somebody in? But you have to ultimately look and say, what is my situation? Why is my situation different? If I'm in Manhattan, I might be looking at something different. First of all, I'm not going to get overwhelmed by the amount of dental practices there are, because I know all I have to do is get my share, right? I would do the math and figure out how many people are within my area, so to speak, and I would figure out, okay, how many of those do I need to be successful? And then I would figure out my average revenue per new patient, how many patients I need per day. I would multiply the two, maybe determine frequency in there as well, and I'd figure out exactly what I need, and I would look at that, and I know my acquisition costs. I know I'm throwing a lot at people, but I would very quickly go, boom, boom, boom. I need 2,200 people. It's going to cost me this much in marketing. This is how I'm going to attract them. I don't need 50 million people. I need 2,200. And 2,200, if I'm in Manhattan, I can just throw a rock. Don't literally throw a rock, but like, okay, I can throw a cotton ball and hit them, right? And then they're right there. So 2,200 are outside your window. So good luck, congratulations. You don't need everybody on the sidewalk. You don't need all the people that are around. So what happens is, in your area, it offers unique things. It offers unique advantages. Then those areas you'll start to deviate from your plan. So you'll see there's a spa dentist or something like, I'm going to be a spa dentist. I'll give you one example, the holistic dentist thing. There's some people, well, I'll create that niche. Well, that one can be tough too. I mean, and I think sometimes people gravitate towards things like that because of the fact that they haven't looked at their business plan. Yep. I see it with sleep dentistry all the time. I see people going into sleep dentistry. You and I have seen it.
It's a buzzword.
People spend hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to, and instead of what they should have done is just focus on their business plan. They didn't have a good business plan, so they threw a bunch of money at sleep dentistry, hoping that would be the solution. Mm-hmm. And then also they end up more in debt. And that wasn't the problem. The problem was the business plan. The business plan was fundamentally broken. And then they were focusing on the wrong thing, and they were focusing on, instead of focusing on the area they needed to. And then they use stories like, I can't in my market, in my area, to attract good people. I can't attract patients. Mm-hmm. I can't do this. And then somebody went and sold them the solution in a bottle, which is ultimately like a sleep dentistry or something. And then they just found themselves $250,000 more in debt, which, by the way, is not fair and not okay to do to people. So I think you have to look at your area and say, what unique advantages do I have? Everyone listening to this should say that. Mm-hmm. In fact, everyone. And if you have 2-3 locations, we have a lot of people that have 5, 6, 7 locations. Yeah. Look, if what unique advantage do each one of these locations have? And then what location, what do they have as a whole that I could use, economies of scale? What can I utilize as far as economies of scales? I just had this conversation. I get fired up in this podcast. I just had this conversation with a doc about branding, right? And we were talking about the idea of branding his 3 locations. And I was like, yeah, I'm a huge favor of it because 1, you're going to use economies of scale. 3, you can talk about the branding power, the power of having multiple providers, multiple locations, multiple ways to serve. And I said, here, what I want you to do is write a benefit letter of why it's such a huge benefit. And so he utilized basically the power of his 3 locations to basically say, hey, how do we utilize the power of those to really attract people? And then retain people too, right? Yeah. I think there's a retention part to this too. So I would say that when you look at your area, you got to say, what are my tools and what's available to me, and maximize the holy world about it. And the interesting part is people think they need, if you look at a dental practice, I had a doctor about a year ago. She was telling me about the type of practice she wanted to create, very high-end type practice. And she was like, how am I going to get all these patients? Because she wanted to be out of network. By the way, I can show anyone how to get out of network. But ultimately, we looked at this doctor, and I said, and we did the math. I just pulled up Google on my phone and did census data, not even in the surrounding areas, but just right around her. And I think she needed 3% of the total market share, 3%, for her to have the successful business model she wanted. She can go get 3%. Yeah. So instead of focusing on everybody else, why are you focusing on everyone else? Why are you focusing on your market being so unique? Because I was listening back to this podcast. I try not to use expletives a lot, but it's complete bullshit. Like it is. It's bullshit. It's not true. It's something you feed yourself and tell yourself a story and say, well, that's why one of the reasons I'm struggling is because I'm in this rural area, or I'm in this metropolitan area, or I can't, those are stories that you've created through expense thinking that did not yield the results you want, but you've solidified them and you keep coming back to them. And they're not reality. I can show anyone in any market how to go boop and grow revenues. It's just that simple. It's not hard. And I could go in your same market. And let me give you an example. Here's a case study. So two doctors, both clients. One of them, they're on this literally same, I never forget this, same street, I won't even say the state now, give it away. So same street. One doctor goes from $800,000 to $6 million. $800,000 to $6 million. He did everything I told him to do. He was at it. He was killing it, doing everything. Ended up out of the dental chair, started doing, it was just amazing. The person across the street in the same hometown said, you can't find associates here. You can't find good patients here. You can't find good doctors here. You don't understand what it's like in my hometown. This is a small little town. They didn't know, by the way, they didn't know they were both clients. Yeah. And then what ended up happening was I was like, oh my gosh, one person's doing everything I'm telling them to do and the other one's not. And it's interesting to watch that happen in real time and realize that one of them said, look at the market and the opportunity. Mm-hmm. They did investment thinking. They were like, look at all that I can yield in this area. And then the other guy said, they did expense thinking and said, you can't yield anything in this small town. This small town doesn't have enough to offer. And by the way, I went to both their homes. They were drastically different. Yeah. And so like dramatically different. Do you get my point? Mm-hmm. So there is no difference. I know some people, as soon as I said that, went, yes, there is. No, there is not. It's a story you've created in your mind. Business is business. It's the reason why Starbucks can do well in all types of areas. And so ultimately speaking, look, Starbucks, if you look at Starbucks, look, the reason I don't put them everywhere is because they're looking for the highest ROI. Yeah. Okay. They could technically put one where they wanted to if they wanted to. Certainly could. And they could really market the world out of it and try to create. They could really put the intentionality to do it. Don't think they can't. Mm-hmm. But they look at ROI and they say, why would we do all that when we can just put one here and it'll be slammed? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Same thing you should do with the dental practice.
That's right. Yep. Exactly.
Even if you're not even looking at purchasing practice, look at your practice now. Figure out what you could do differently than everybody else that'll make your revenue go.
Now, location can make a difference on the road you put it on. Now, I'm not saying you can't be successful anywhere, but if you're looking at the same city and you have one of them on a major thoroughfare and one of them back in some medical park, now, they both can be just as successful. Understand one's marketing budget is going to look drastically different than the others because 40,000 cars passing in front of your building a day yields great results, right? Especially if you got like a billboard over it saying like with an arrow, like right here. Yields. I had a doctor do that one time and she was getting like 160 new patients a month from that one sign that like pointed down at her building. And so, yes, I would argue that there's some advantages of being on a major thoroughfare. Yeah. Yes, that matters. I would argue that being visible as a Main Street type business is important. Yeah. However, I've worked with so many doctors who are up in high rises and things like that are just as successful. Mm-hmm. So yes, there's some advantages in that. I would argue that there are some advantages in those locations, but there's also just it's different where you put your money because you might have paid more for the space. The other person needs to understand that they need to put the money in marketing. So let's go to that high rise. You can be just as successful in that high rise as you can on Main Street, but understand they paid for the spot on Main Street, so they don't have to put as much in marketing. You need to put the money in marketing because nobody knows where you are. So but
it's not going to differ from like a state standpoint. It's like, I'm in New York, so it's going to be different for me than it is in Georgia. Yeah, I think a great analogy is if you look into, like, when we first started Tower Leadership, I was on the road a little bit, and I would go into these medical buildings, and I could tell the difference between a large practice and a small practice. You have one building. There's 8 dental practices in there, okay? You can clearly tell who's dominating that, but they're in the same location. They're just treating their business a little bit differently than the rest of them. So the math shows, it proves it right there just by looking at certain things like that.
Yeah, great point. I think People, look, I put a dental practice right in the middle of 10 of them, it'd be just fine.
Yeah.
Quit focusing on all your competitors. Quit focusing on your energy on what they're doing, because most of them, they don't know what they're doing. And so go focus on you. Go put in your mindset around investment thinking and do that, and you'll yield the results. So what I would tell people listening to this podcast is, don't get so focused on what those things that you think won't work, the things that hold you back. Focus on what part of this narrative have you told yourself that's holding you back. By the way, we've all done it. What part of the narrative is holding you back, and then what part of the narrative can help you explode? What are the advantages of your situation? By the way, it doesn't even matter if you're listening to this and you feel like, I'm successful. How do you utilize it more? How do you get better? How do you improve? What other ways can you use your community? What other ways can you use that knowledge? What other ways can you look at the competition and see what they're doing versus what you're doing in a good way to say, look, what are my competitive advantages in the marketplace? And if you do that, I'm just telling you right now, there's a huge amount of opportunity, and it doesn't matter whether you're in Iowa, Indiana, California, Chicago, Pensacola, LA. It doesn't matter. Just focus on fundamentals of business, and you can get there.
Yep.
Awesome. Hey guys, thanks for listening. Glad to have you as always. Glad to have you be there. Now, don't miss the 100th episode. You're going to want to be here for this.
Friday.
I'm going to be giving away some things. You want to be on YouTube or Facebook. Go on YouTube right now and go ahead and click subscribe, do that on the Tower Facebook page. We're going to be on both of those, right, Matthew?
So just type in Tower Leadership into YouTube page and you'll see it right there. Subscribe to it. Same thing on Facebook. Just follow us, and then you'll get a notification that says we're live on Friday at noon Eastern time.
Noon Eastern time. Be available. You're not going to want to miss it. It's going to cost you a lot if you're not there. So you want to be there on Friday. I guarantee you it's going to be a great time. See you then.